Welcome back to the Missionary Position podcast, episode 8. Today, our title is The Missionary F Word, Fundraising. So welcome back to the Missionary Position podcast. This is episode 8. Let's talk about the Missionary F Word, fundraising. It's a part of missions that no one really wants to talk about, but every missionary has to face. In the old days, missionaries wrote letters by hand, travelled by ship, and trusted God, often with no safety net. Today, we have social media, Patreon, newsletters, GoFundMes, but the struggle is still the same. How do you raise support without losing your soul? In this episode, we're diving into the old and new ways missionaries raise funds, the tension between faith and finances, and how to live by faith without falling into fear or manipulation. This one's honest, practical, and maybe just a bit uncomfortable, but it's needed, especially for those of you who feel called to missions but have no idea how to sustain yourself, or rather, allow God to sustain you. The awkward truth about the F word. Why fundraising makes both missionaries and supporters uncomfortable. First of all, we need to assess our hearts when it comes to money. Fundraising makes missionaries uncomfortable, just as the serving of food to the widows made the disciples uncomfortable in Acts 6. It's something that must be addressed and needs to be done, but if the disciples spent all their time fundraising, how can they do the work they've been called to? They needed somebody to serve the food. Of highest importance, it's something that needs to be done, but can't be done all the time by the missionaries themselves. So they need people who are spiritual, gifted, and talented by the Lord to help them do it. Fundraising can make supporters uncomfortable because it's a vulnerable topic. You're talking about people's false idol that's in direct conflict with God, money. The Bible tells us you cannot serve both God and money. You hate one and despise the other. People love to be in control of their finances because to the world that looks wise. You have control, financial freedom to make decisions, but when it comes to God, He always loves to push us beyond our comfort zone, and He loves us to be surrendered to Him in every area. He will often use a missionary to poke this bear. I've seen people stop talking to me, physically move away from me when I've gone back to the UK, or say things like, "How's the Philippines? Do you love it there?" Like you're on vacation. Maybe because there's an uncomfortable feeling of guilt, or they don't want to be asked for money, or they've already given somewhere else and they feel pressure to give. It can feel like dirty talking about money. That's why we're calling it the missionary F word. It can feel like a dirty thing if we have an incorrect view on money. It's private. It's something we use to build wealth and status, not something we discuss sending to you and sharing with natives across the nations. There's an unspoken Western discomfort with money in ministry, a direct conflict between money being a worldly thing and money being needed. This is because in Matthew 6:24, Jesus tells us you can't serve both. Money can be in direct conflict with God's position in our lives. If we view money as our master, we will have problems with money in ministry, as ministry is God's work. But if we see money as a gift from God, a tool for His kingdom, a holy thing that sustains ministry, this will allow us to have a much more balanced biblical view on money for fundraising and mission work. Without money, God's work and word cannot go out. Missionaries need to live, events and outreaches need funding, sustainable work needs cash flow. And yet so many people are uncomfortable talking about it. Jesus talked about money more than most topics because it reveals the heart. I always teach that if you follow the money, you will find where people's hearts and treasure is, because Jesus says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So follow the money. See where your heart is. It's a painful assessment, but very necessary. The history of missionary fundraising. How the missionaries of old did it. George Mueller, a former lawyer turned preacher, founded numerous orphanages in England. Hudson Taylor, a young missionary doctor, the founder of the China Inland Mission and missionary to China himself, and D.L. Moody, evangelist and founder of Moody Bible Institute and Moody Church in Chicago, and the founder of the YMCA in Chicago, All three believed God would provide, and all three believed in prayer first before embarking on any work God had asked them to do. And in all three cases, God did provide. But the strategy of these three men was different for fundraising. Mueller funded orphanages entirely through prayer. He prayed alone with minimal information about the need and zero solicitation. Hudson Taylor prayed, distributed full information, but zero solicitation. And on reading his prayer journals, it reveals much of his finance came from Mueller, passed on to him. D.L. Moody prayed, gave the full information of the need, and requested full solicitation. Mueller was against sharing too much information on the need, saying it's not enough to obtain means for the work of God, but that these means should be obtained in God's way. To ask unbelievers for means is not God's way. To press even believers to give is not God's way. But the duty and the privilege of being allowed to contribute to the work of God should be pointed out, and this should be followed up with earnest prayer, believing prayer, and will result in the desired end. Wow. Hudson Taylor said the apostolic plan was not to raise ways and means, but to go and do the work, trusting his promise, seeking first the kingdom of God. D.L. Moody added a very different viewpoint. I show my faith when I go to men and state to them the needs of the Lord's work and ask them to give to it. Moody humorously penned a new beatitude later in life. Blessed are the money raisers, for in heaven they shall stand next to the martyrs. This is all about perspective and situation. Strategy for raising funds is essential and based upon each man's conscience and each man's work. All three of these strategies worked for God's advancing kingdom, and all three should be tried and tested. Don't worry the outcome if God is with you. We've done fundraising training with our Missionary Training Center here in the Philippines, and following the steps, we've received complaints about the students asking for solicitation. A perfect example of a missionary's experience with fundraising. You ask people who you believe would honor and be privileged to give, and if their response is contrary to that, that's between them and their God, and that's okay. It makes your skin thicker and your heart humble to trust that God will provide. Lehman Abbott, Moody's friend, said, all money belongs to the Lord, and it can be had for the Lord's work if one goes about it the right way to get it. Moody was nominated as the president of building the YMCA building in Chicago and ran many children's ministries all throughout the week. He had the job of fundraising for this building, and one of his supporters was Cyrus Hall McCormick, a Presbyterian and the inventor of the combine harvester, which transformed farming all over the world and made him a great fortune. He promised Moody $10,000 in 1866. Imagine the sum of that amount. He loved Moody and viewed him as a man of great worth. One day, Moody went to McCormick's and told him that the mission school is in a dreadful state. And McCormick said, why are you striking me rather hard of late? I just gave you money not long ago. Moody said, I need $1,000. And McCormick said, surely you don't mean to ask me for more money after I just gave. But McCormick went up the stairs and wrote a check. Moody said he thought to himself, what a fool I am for not asking for $2,000. And he fell to his knees there in the parlor and asked God to give him $2,000. McCormick came down the stairs with a sealed envelope, gave it to Moody. Moody thanked him and ran to the study of the Chicago Minster and told him to open the envelope. Moody told him, there's a check in there for $2,000. How do you know? Have you seen it? Said the minister. And Moody said, no, but I asked the Lord for it, and I know it's there. I came all the way across Chicago to prove my faith in prayer. Harsa, the Chicago Minster, opened the envelope, and there was a check for $2,000 inside, payable to Mr. Moody, signed by Mr. McCormick. This account of Moody's fundraising in John Pollock's book, Moody Without Sankey, brings me to tears. Oh, that millionaires would respond to fundraising for God's kingdom so openly, and not just the voice of the missionary, but also the voice of God, as he went up the stairs and wrote the check for $2,000. We may look at Mueller's way, in the first instance, as the way of incredible faith, prayer only. But on reading this story about Moody's faith, the humility in fundraising for me is unmatched. Such humility to ask people to give of their false god of money. What a master of the spiritual art of fundraising. You know, sometimes Westerners think fundraising is a modern thing, like missionaries are salespeople with a holy product. But all through the Bible, God's people gave towards his purpose. From Moses building the tabernacle, to David preparing the temple, to women funding Jesus' ministry, to churches supporting Paul, the story is the same. God gives vision to some and provision to others. And when the two meet, that's where the miracle happens. The modern mission reality. Today, we can reach supporters and partners through social media, newsletters, vlogs, support raising in a digital world. But the true cost is still very much hidden in the experiences of poverty, health struggles, and burnout that often goes unseen. The missionaries of old are great reminders that you can continue doing this work and God will provide. Even if people don't know about the need, God will sustain his children. We've seen this time after time again. Hospital bills that the doctor tells us there's no charge, miracle food that's given by the poorest of people. Let's not look at wealthy people as a means of provision. Wealth doesn't equal generosity, as poverty doesn't equal tight-fistedness. I heard an amazing missionary tell me, "You know, Ruth, I don't pray for God to provide for our daily needs. He promised to provide in his word. Why would I pray for something he already promised me?" I was slightly stunned, wondering, how much time do I spend praying for things God's already promised me, and perhaps I should just claim them? And also that kind of level of faith, that fully relying on God to not even have to ask him for it. Whew, it challenged me, and I still ask him for stuff. But sometimes I do say, that's on you, God. You got to do this. You called us here to this place and you must sustain us. Living by faith today. Faith isn't passivity. It's obedience with dependence. It's every day getting up and seeing the needs in front of your face and trusting and praying and believing God will do it. He did it before, he will do it again. But the need never ends. There's always another need. We're always looking to sustainable options, at training the right people for the job and reusing every resource and material in every opportunity. We must balance strategy and work with surrender. Balance in fundraising is very important. Your work and your trust in God must go hand in hand. We don't lay around all day waiting for someone in England to send support. We use the resources we have, the people, the gifts, the talents God's given us, and begin to move on with the work and ask people to partner with the work to see it to completion. God provides through people, and he also surprises you. There was this one time I was absolutely exhausted. We got invited to bring our youth group to a Korean meeting in the same town, and honestly, I didn't really want to go. Lots of times you can't understand the meeting if a Korean's preaching because it gets translated from Korean to broken English. We were tired, stretched thin, and it felt like another thing on the list. And at that time, we didn't have any money. But we took the youth anyway because we hoped we'd get some kind of a snack out of it. That night, our team kept winning prizes. Not spiritual prizes. It was like household items, and we were laughing, saying, "Alive is so blessed. Alive is always win." And it's funny, it's true. We always seem to win things where we go. But we had no cash flow, no money. When we were leaving, Melody and Evangeline came running over and gave Hudson and Liberty some fake American dollar bills. Hudson was like throwing it on the floor, and I was super nonchalant about it, didn't really respond. But suddenly the Korean lady came over to me and was waving her hand saying, "No, no, no." And she picked up the money and put it in my hand. And when I looked at it, I realized, whoa, God's provided again. In a place we didn't want to go, in a moment we didn't expect, through people we didn't even know and they didn't know our needs, there was 4 $50 bills given to my children. I was thinking it was fake evangelism money that churches use for games and dramas. I'm not used to seeing American dollar bills. It was like God whispering, "You show up and I'll take care of you." Sometimes fundraising looks like newsletters, supporters, and planned giving. And sometimes it looks like a Korean night with real American dollars being shoved in your hand by a woman who refuses to let you think it's fake. That's missionary life. Faith with surprises. The line between faith and poverty. Living by faith doesn't mean living in lack, although it can often feel that way. Many times we've had no rice, no money, no fuel, or our lovely neighbours will bring us a sack of rice as a miracle to the door, or someone randomly gives some support from somewhere that has no idea that we need it. There's a difference between trusting God to provide and romanticizing poverty. The Bible never glorifies lack. It glorifies generosity and dependence. Missionaries shouldn't have to starve to prove their faith, but they also shouldn't manipulate to get funds. The sweet spot is faith, where obedience meets partnership. Poverty doesn't glorify God. Obedience does. In the old days, people in England would dry out their used tea bags and send them to missionaries. As a missionary, this mindset on my part is terrible. Imagine believing missionaries will have the leftovers, the cast-offs, the unwanted things. And again, it's kind of true, because when you've got nothing, anything is a blessing. This is a lot of my life experience. People think because you're a missionary, you'll take any trash that people give you, like you're a religious junk shop. One of the huge cultural things I learned coming here was that no matter people's financial status, people still have choice, favourite colours, styles, things they like, foods that are their favourite. We have a British saying, beggars should not be choosers, but should missionaries be beggars? I remember having a guest and they asked me some questions about our living situation, and I shared, I refuse to live in a poverty mentality, in the sense of, yeah, I live in poverty. The house we were renting at the time was in a rice field. When we moved in, it had no electricity, no running water, no shower. But what I meant was I'm not lowering God's provision for me in his work here just because I live in poverty. God's children are worth more. This is a hard struggle to face even today in the community we live in. It's poor, and we make do with as much as we can to make life go longer and harder. But we absolutely believe for God's provision for his kingdom projects and resources for our blessing and favor over the Filipinos' lives that we live with no limit. This is not a prosperity gospel in any way. It's a gospel of God will not see his children out begging for bread. So when we don't have enough food, we're going to claim that scripture out loud and proud. In fact, I often have to check my heart because I know the lifestyle in the West and the resources at hand that are taken for granted. And it's all within the culture, so it cannot be seen. I remember when I met Andrew, he'd been brought up here in the Philippines, and so he knew the value of food. And he would see my family throw food away. And I could see every time the food would be put in the trash, he'd be in pain. And he would say, "Oh, don't throw that away." And I would say, "What should we do? Put it in a box and send it abroad?" And to my shame, I was 17 at the time and I was in my Western mindset. But not now. I've had my eyes opened and heart hurt enough to know eating frog and rice for dinner is a blessing from God because it rained. It's a different world, and sometimes it feels like a different God we serve. Poverty opens your eyes to a faith and a survival of life that the West doesn't know is possible because they don't need it. God provides, but he often does this through his people. That's the beauty of Western generosity when it's fueled by compassion. We have to view money as something that's not dirty or bad, but something as holy. Giving isn't charity, it's partnership. Understanding the privilege and honor of giving is essential to a Christian lifestyle. Money should be viewed as a tool, and if it's a tool like a hammer, you use it for all good intent and purposes. Instead, we put this hammer on a pedestal and say, "No, you're not touching my hammer. Don't talk about my hammer. That's my hammer. I worked very hard for that hammer." And God's like, everything you have comes from my hand. And if you just trust in your hammer or your money, you're missing the whole point of life. I gave you that hammer to help others use that hammer for the growth of my kingdom. But you just get that hammer, put it in the toolbox to never be seen, to be passed on to your children one day. Money is a tool, a resource that brings access and opens doors for missionaries we couldn't otherwise open. Western believers have the privilege of fueling eternal work that they may never see. Your giving is someone else's answered prayer. When you give to a missionary, you don't just fund their work, you share in their harvest. Missionaries aren't beggars, they're bridges. It is essential that missionaries learn to fundraise well and that the West also is comfortable to respond to fundraising needs. The word give is used over 2,000 times in the Bible. If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need, but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? 1 John 3:17. Ouch. You will be enriched in every way so that you can be generous on every occasion. And through us, your generosity will result in thanksgiving to God. 2 Corinthians 9:11. Again, our position on money and fundraising is a matter of the heart. Follow the money, you will find people's hearts. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Fundraising is not a comfortable word and shouldn't be viewed as such when missionaries need support to push through with God's kingdom plan. Thank you to everyone who supports us and God's work here. Let's remember the position of a missionary is one of prayer, sharing needs, and asking for support. Let's be willing to have open ears to hear the need, hands that are willing to work towards it, and hearts that are found in God's kingdom. See you next time on the Missionary Position podcast.